And so we start out with very precise questions. It turns out, like with the browser, it's how you navigate, but also interact with the internet. And so how that actually works for you, what do people do? What are they trying to do on the internet? What's helpful for them? What gets in the way? Boils down in a piece of software to very specific questions. Like, how should tabs work? It seems like a pretty basic question. The answer is no one knows. We have tabs, different browsers implement them different ways, people have their favorites, but it's all anecdotal. And it's what the developers like, and it's a little bit of the stories that come in through forums, and it's what might make sense to me. But we don't actually have large quantities of data about basic things like how do people try to interact with the internet. And so the product people, of course, are deep into tabs for their own sake, but the bigger picture is this is such a fundamental tool as to how we navigate our online lives, what could make it work. We have a problem, as do all significant, well, Microsoft, I guess, but it's so many people that you actually can't get far enough anymore on anecdotal evidence. So in a data conference, that's probably really clear. So here's the key thing. When most, especially companies, start to gather data, but probably any organization, the initial impulse is to gather every piece of data that you can, because you might find it useful, and also to keep it for a long time. We made the opposite choice. We made the choice that we will define beforehand what's the question that we're trying to solve and what's the data that we need to solve it. And so that's why when you saw that question about tabs and links, they're very precise. It's not how do people use the internet, right? Because it's hard to know what information to gather, and so in that case you suck it all in, and then you try and figure out, well, how do I analyze it? What does it actually mean? And so this is a bit of an opposite approach from the Skyhook folks who are gathering all of that data and then looking at it and trying to figure out what it means. So that's one approach. We're on the other end of saying we're trying to solve a very specific question. We will only collect the information that we need to solve that question. And that way we can describe it to you beforehand, and you can decide whether or not that's information that you're happy to share for the common good. So this is the same slide as the one we saw before, but of course in a different style of presentation, sort of like the ad morphing discussion yesterday. So this says pretty much the same thing. This is pretty obvious. OK, so what do we actually do here? What happens with Test Pilot is that there are many different places where you opt in. So the first thing is it's an add-on to Firefox. That means you have to decide, I'm interested enough and willing to maybe share some of my personal information for the common good that I'll participate. Right? In this case, the common good is making the internet work better for you and for everyone else. So the first decision is you have to actually install a piece of software. We could not put something like this into Firefox as a default. Right? The Mozilla community would not accept that kind of privacy interaction built into the browser. Maybe some time from now. So first thing you do is you decide, I'm willing to install this piece of software. The next thing that happens is you get a request that says, oh, there's a survey, or there's a test, or there's a data collection effort underway. Are you interested in participating? So the first one, for example, was a very brief survey that says, please tell us about yourself. Gender, age, those sorts of things. How many computers in your house? Are you a novice? And as you would expect, of course, it shows a very high degree of self-selection in that survey. And then the second one was this question about tabs. So what you get is you get a statement that says, OK, this next survey, this next test is about tabs. Are you interested in participating? And then you have the choice to say, oh man, I never use tabs. I don't care I don't care. People can see all my data, great. Or I don't like tabs, or there's a lot of personal information. I don't want to have anything to do with it. And you just say yes or no. You opt in or out to a particular survey. And then at the end, you get another chance to actually look at your data and say, wow, is this what I thought? Is what would be sent to Mozilla the kinds of information I thought would be sent to Mozilla? And if it is, great, send it off. If it's not, and you look up and you say, oh man, I didn't realize I'd signed up for that, then you just say no and we never see it. And so there's many points where as an individual you can say, yep, I like that or I don't. Now, of course, in terms of gathering data and having an unbiased data set and having the full scope of the universe, we're not optimized for that. It's very clear that the more chances you give people not to participate, the more chances they won't. So we don't have a perfect solution yet, but we are trying to start with a very safe sort of trade-off. And so what we tell people is the data gets sanitized before it's collected. We're not collecting everything about you. It gets stored in an anonymous and aggregate form. And in our case, because we're an open source and nonprofit organization, the actual source code for what we're doing and how we do it's available. So if you want to see how we're storing things and what our techniques are and whether we're doing what we told you we would, that's all there. If you want to take the time to look through our systems, you're welcome to do that. And then the test results, not only do you submit them for some sort of common good, but the actual data itself should be made public. And as I mentioned earlier, this was difficult to articulate how we could do this and people would still feel safe, especially in Europe. So we've selected some areas where it's pretty clear. The idea with that is that it shouldn't be our data. We have the benefit, again, of not maximizing for revenue. As a nonprofit, we're maximizing for the quality of the internet. And so the temptation to keep the data for ourselves and gather as much and mine it as much as we can and generate as much economic value from it is not something that we need to be focused on. Right? Our shareholders and constituents want a different kind of return. It's not a financial return. And so it makes it much easier for us to make the data public and say, whoever can get use out of it, you're welcome to it. So this is really a diagram of what I just described. So I put it up afterwards, so I'll give you a minute if you want to look at the diagram again in terms of learning style. But it says pretty much all the different ways in which you as the individual have the choice of what happens to your data. And so, as Sandy might have said, this is the case if you really do own your data. Right? We're going to give you more choices maybe than you even want about how not to send it off to us. But when you decide that something's important to you or it's irrelevant to you, one or the other, and you're willing to participate, then you should feel safe about it. Is people reading that, or should I go on? Okay. And so this idea of letting people see what gets collected before it gets sent off is probably, I guess it could be done if you were collecting a steady stream of real-time data. Again, I'm thinking about the phones and the information that Skyhook was describing. I'm sure you could periodically say, this is the kind of data, or this is the kind of data that was sent off about you yesterday. Are you comfortable? But it's certainly much harder. In this case, we're saying, this is the kind of data that we're collecting. It's for a discrete period of time. Here it is. What do you think? And this, of course, as the studies get complex, you may need to give some thought to what it actually means if you see a chart. But this is the data from the study on tabs. And so, in fact, it shows up in your browser. You can get to it at any point, and you can say yes or no or stop.